Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. How does a simple backyard shed lead to a legal threat against your house? That's what I wanted to know when my HOA came after me. They thought I was just some quiet hobbyist they could bully. What they didn't realize is that they picked a fight with the one person whose job is to find the single mistake that unravels everything. I want to start by saying I am not someone who enjoys conflict. I work in quality assurance for a software company, which basically means my entire job is reading fine print, spotting inconsistencies, and documenting everything in triplicate. I say that because it becomes relevant later. I am quiet, I mind my own business, and my idea of a good weekend is sanding down an old piece of furniture in my backyard and slowly bringing it back to life. I restore antique furniture as a hobby. Dressers, cabinets, side tables, things people put out for trash that have decades of good wood underneath a layer of peeling paint. It is deeply satisfying work and it is completely harmless. 2 years ago, I bought my first house. It took me a while to find the right one. I had a specific list of things I needed, and near the top of that list was privacy. I grew up in apartments and I was done with hearing my neighbors through the walls. When a real estate agent showed me a house on the far edge of a subdivision, backing up against a small patch of wooded land, I knew it was the one. It was slightly cheaper than the other houses in the area, and at the time I figured that was because it was further from the main entrance and had a slightly smaller lot on one side. I did not think much about it. I signed the papers, moved in, and got to work turning the place into something I was proud of. For the first year, I kept my furniture restoration hobby mostly in the garage, but the garage was small and ventilation was bad, and the chemicals I used for stripping old finishes really needed open air. I started planning a proper workshop shed in the backyard. Not a plastic kit shed you snap together on a Sunday afternoon. I mean a real structure with a solid foundation. Framed walls, a shingled roof that matched the house, and 2 windows for airflow and light. I drew up my own plans, spent weeks reading through the city's residential building codes, and made sure everything I was planning met or exceeded every requirement. Then I applied for a building permit. The city inspector came out, looked at my plans, asked a few questions, and approved everything. When the permit arrived in the mail, I actually printed it out and framed it. I hung it inside the shed once it was done, right next to the door. Some people might think that is over the top, but to me it represented months of careful planning and doing things the right way, and I wanted it visible. The build took most of the summer. I hired a contractor for the foundation and framing because I am handy but not that handy, and I wanted it done right. Then I did a lot of the finishing work myself. By early fall, the shed was complete. Proper foundation, shingled roof, 2 windows with actual trim around them, and a coat of exterior paint that matched my house exactly. I even put a small window box under one of the windows and planted some flowers in it. The whole thing looked like it belonged there. I was really proud of it. That is when the trouble started. A few days after I finished the window box, I was in the front yard pulling weeds when a woman in a golf cart rolled up and slowed to a stop near my driveway. She was in her late 50s, clipboard resting on her lap, with an expression that said she had caught me doing something wrong even though I was just pulling weeds. She asked me if I knew the grass along my property edge was getting long. I told her thanks, I would take care of it. She sat there for another few seconds like she was deciding whether to write something down, then drove off. I had seen her a few times before in the neighborhood. She was on some kind of architectural committee for the HOA. She had a reputation for being thorough, which seemed like a polite way of saying she looked for reasons to bother people. I did not think much about the interaction until about a week later when I found a notice in my mailbox. It was from the HOA. The notice stated that an unapproved auxiliary structure had been erected on my property in violation of the community's governing documents. It described the shed as potentially unsafe and said the design was not in keeping with community standards. The notice gave me 30 days to remove it or face fines starting at $100 a day. My first reaction was genuine confusion. I had a city-issued building permit. The shed had passed inspection. I figured it was a case of the HOA not knowing that the city had already signed off on everything and that a quick conversation would clear it up. I sent a polite message to the HOA board explaining the situation and attaching a copy of my building permit. I kept it friendly. I asked them to point me to the specific section of their rules they believed applied to my property, just so I understood exactly what the concern was. The response came from the committee chair, the woman with the golf cart and the clipboard. Her reply was short and dismissive. She told me that city permits had no bearing on HOA covenants, that the committee had made its determination, and that the notice stood. She did not engage with anything I had asked, she just repeated the demand. A day or two after that, I was out back doing some work on a rocking chair I was restoring when I heard the hum of a golf cart near my fence. The committee chair had come around to the back of the houses along the edge of the subdivision and stopped where she could see my shed. She did not get off the cart. She just looked at it for a moment, then looked at me and told me she hoped I was making plans to have it taken down. She said something about it being an eyesore and a liability, and that people like her had to work hard to protect property values for everyone in the community. That was the moment I stopped thinking of this as a simple misunderstanding. She had not asked a single question about the shed. She had not asked about construction methods, foundation quality, materials, or anything that would actually matter if you actually believed something was unsafe. She had looked at it from 30 feet away and called it an eyesore and a liability. I thanked her politely and went back to the rocking chair, but I was not feeling polite at all. 30 days passed. I did not remove the shed because I had no legal obligation to remove it, and I knew it. A new notice arrived with a running total of fines. Then another one. The tone of each one got a little sharper. After about 2 months, the total was pushing $3,000, and then something changed. A letter arrived from a law firm. The firm represented the HOA. The letter was several pages long and cited breach of the community's covenants and restrictions. It threatened to place a lien on my property if the fines were not paid and the shed was not removed. It laid out a timeline and said legal action would follow if I failed to respond. That changed things, not because I was scared, but because a lien threat is serious and it meant I needed to stop drafting polite emails and start doing actual research. I want to be clear about something. When you buy a house, you receive an enormous amount of paperwork. The closing documents alone can fill a binder. Title reports, deed information, plat maps, seller disclosures, HOA, governing documents if applicable. Most people sign everything, take the keys, and put the binder in a drawer and never look at it again. I had done more or less the same thing, except that my quality assurance brain had made me at least skim through most of it once. I remembered there being a plat map in the package. I dug out the binder. It took me a couple of hours to find everything and spread it out across the dining room table. I started with the deed itself, then the title report, and then I got to the plat map. It was a large folded sheet showing the layout of the subdivision, each lot numbered, the roads labeled, and the outer boundary of the development drawn in a thick, bold line. I smoothed the map out and found the area where my house sat, at the edge of the subdivision near the woods. My lot was outside the line, not by a little. Clearly, unambiguously outside the boundary of the subdivision as it was drawn on the official plat map. The bold border of the development ran right along my property's edge. My parcel was on the other side of it. I sat there for probably 10 minutes just staring at the map, then I went back through the title report. There was a reference to a parcel number for my property. I wrote it down. Then I found the section of the documents that listed the HOA's governing documents, the articles of incorporation, and the covenants. There was a list of parcel numbers subject to those covenants. My parcel number was not on the list. I had bought a house next to the subdivision, not inside it. The developer, at some point before officially filing the subdivision's plat and its covenants, had sold this one parcel off separately. It sat adjacent to the community. It backed up against the same woods that some of the community's edge lots backed up against. The houses looked similar because they were probably built around the same time. But my home had never been subject to the HOA's rules. Not a single page of their governing documents applied to me. I understood now why the price had been slightly lower than comparable homes in the area. It probably had a different set of deed restrictions than a standard HOA lot, and whoever sold it had disclosed that, buried somewhere in the paperwork. I just had not caught the significance of it at the time. I did not immediately fire off a message to the HOA's attorney. I am not wired that way. I knew what I was looking at, but I also knew that a printout from my closing documents was not the same as certified county records. Before I said anything to anyone, I needed to be certain. I took a day off work and went to the county records office. I asked for the official recorded plat for the subdivision, and I asked for the HOA's original articles of incorporation on file with the county. The clerk pulled both. I sat at one of those long tables they have in those offices and went through each one carefully. The official county plat map matched what I had at home. The subdivision boundary was drawn in the same place. My parcel sat outside it. The articles of incorporation listed the parcels that made up the HOA. My parcel number was not there. I asked the clerk for certified copies of both documents. They had a stamp and a seal process that makes them legally recognized as official records rather than just printouts. I paid for them and walked out of that building feeling something I had not felt since this whole thing started, which was completely calm. I also made one more stop before going home. I went to a copy shop and made several sets of clean copies of everything, then organized each set in its own folder. One set for me. One set in case I needed to hand something to an attorney quickly. One set locked in my car. I know that probably sounds like overkill, but I work in quality assurance. Backups are just how I think. Now I had a decision to make. The obvious move was to have an attorney send a letter back to the HOA's law firm pointing out the jurisdictional problem and demanding everything be dropped. That probably would have worked. But after months of threatening notices, a lien threat, and a woman in a golf cart calling my shed an eyesore, I was not interested in a quiet resolution anymore. I thought about it for a couple of days. The HOA's attorney had sent that legal threat without apparently doing the basic step of verifying that my property was actually subject to the HOA. That was a significant failure. Either the attorney had asked the HOA board whether my parcel was covered and taken their word for it without checking, or nobody had thought to ask at all. Either way, the firm was operating on bad information and threatening me with a lien. I also want to mention something that was happening on the side during all of this because it adds to the picture. The neighborhood had a private online group, one of those community pages where people post about lost dogs and garage sales. I was in it because I had joined when I first moved in and never left. At some point during the 30-day notice period, the committee chair posted something in the group. She did not name me specifically, but she wrote about residents who were ignoring community safety standards and how it affected everyone's property values. She wrote it in that careful way that is designed to sound like a general concern while everyone reading it knows exactly who you are talking about. A couple of people commented agreeing with her. A few others posted clapping emojis. I watched it happen and said nothing, because engaging in that forum would have looked defensive, and I did not have enough of the picture yet to defend myself properly. What made it worse was that some of the people who had been friendly with me in the 2 years since I moved in started being a little less friendly. Not dramatic, just the kind of thing where someone who used to wave from across the street suddenly finds something very interesting to look at on their phone when you walk by. It was petty and it was frustrating and there was nothing I could do about it in the moment. I decided to make them do their own homework. I sent one more message. I addressed it to the committee chair, the full HOA board, and the attorney at the law firm. The message was polite and careful. I explained that given the escalating nature of the situation, I was preparing to consult with a lawyer of my own. I said that before authorizing my counsel to proceed, I wanted to make sure they had all the relevant information. I asked, for the official record, that they provide me with the specific section of the HOA's founding documents that granted them legal authority over my property's parcel number. I listed my actual parcel number in the message. I said I was looking forward to their prompt response. I want to explain why I phrased it that way. I was not asking them to prove something I already knew they could not prove. I was asking them to try. Because the moment that attorney sat down and actually looked for my parcel number in the governing documents, the whole thing would unravel. And I wanted that unraveling to happen on their end, not mine. I wanted them to find it themselves rather than having my attorney point it out, because that would mean they had no excuses. They could not claim they had not been given the chance to verify. I had given them the exact parcel number and asked them directly. Then I waited. The first 3 days were quiet. No response from anyone. On the 4th day, I got a short reply from the attorney at the law firm. Not from the HOA board, not from the committee chair, just the attorney. The message said that after reviewing the governing documents, it appeared that my property was not subject to the community's covenants and restrictions. The attorney attributed it to a clerical error. All notices and fines were rescinded. There was a brief apology for any inconvenience. That was it. One short paragraph undoing months of escalating pressure, thousands of dollars in threatened fines, and a lien threat against my house. I read the message a few times. I was not angry exactly. I was not relieved either. I was mostly just aware that this apology, sent in a quiet email to me alone, was not the same as what had been done to me. The threatening notices had not been private. The lien threat had not been private. A neighbor had sent me a screenshot of a post in the community's online group where the committee chair had written vaguely about uncooperative residents who posed a risk to community standards. She had not named me, but there was no question who she meant. Several people had replied agreeing with her. Some of them were neighbors I had waved to for 2 years, and they had stopped waving back around the time the notices started. A quiet email asking me to consider the matter closed was not going to fix any of that. I was thinking about my next step when a neighbor I was still on good terms with knocked on my door and mentioned that the HOA's annual meeting was coming up in about 2 weeks. He said there was an election for the board and the committee chair was running for the top position. I told him I might drop by. The meeting was held in the community center attached to the neighborhood's shared green space. I had technically never attended an HOA meeting before for obvious reasons, but nobody at the door asked for proof of membership. I signed in, took a seat in the back row, and waited. The committee chair ran the meeting. She had clearly done this before. She moved through the agenda with the confidence of someone who expected no pushback. She talked about the past year's achievements, cited some landscaping improvements and a repaved parking area, and then pivoted to her re-election pitch. She talked about protecting property values. She talked about upholding standards. She used the word safety several times. The room gave her polite applause. When the portion of the meeting opened for homeowner comments, I stood up and walked to the front of the room. I introduced myself by my address. I said I lived just adjacent to the community. I watched a few faces shift when I said that, like they were trying to place me. Then I told them I wanted to share something that I thought the community deserved to hear, given that their board chair was asking for their votes. I kept my voice level. I was not there to yell or to humiliate anyone more than the facts themselves would. I walked through the whole thing from the beginning. The shed I had built with a city-issued permit, the notice demanding I tear it down within 30 days, the committee chair's personal visit to my yard where she called my shed an eyesore, the escalating fines, the lien threat from their law firm. I held up the notice with the fines total. I held up the attorney's letter. People in the room were quiet. Then I said there was one thing about all of this that the board chair had never bothered to check, and neither had their attorney, apparently until I forced the question. I held up the certified copy of the county's official plat map and I walked them through it. The subdivision boundary, my parcel sitting outside it. My parcel number absent from the list of properties subject to the HOA's covenants. I had borrowed a neighbor's laptop and connected it to the projector the HOA used for meeting presentations. I pulled up a scanned image of the plat map on the screen behind me so everyone in the room could see it clearly. The room was not quiet anymore. I heard people talking over each other. Someone near the front asked the committee chair directly if this was accurate. She said something about clerical errors and that the matter had been resolved privately. A man 2 rows from the front stood up and asked why, if the matter had been resolved, the community's online group still had posts calling uncooperative residents a safety risk. There was more noise. I waited for things to settle slightly and then said one more thing. I said that this was not just about what had happened to me. I said the board chair had spent months threatening a homeowner who had no legal connection to this HOA whatsoever, had never checked the basic question of whether they had any authority, and had used the community's attorney to send lien threats based on nothing. I asked the room what else might be going wrong in their governance if something this basic had gone unexamined. I thanked them for their time, picked up my folder, and went back to my seat. The election happened about 20 minutes later. The committee chair lost by a wide margin. A man who had been quietly asking questions during the meeting ran essentially as a protest candidate, and he won. 2 other new faces were elected alongside him. The old board was gone. After the meeting broke up, several neighbors came over to talk to me. Some of them I recognized, including a couple who had gone cold on me during the whole ordeal. One of them said they had not known the full story and were sorry about how things had played out in the group posts. I told them I appreciated that. The committee chair left before the meeting was fully over. She slipped out while people were still talking near the voting table. I did not watch her go. The new board reached out to me within a few days of taking over. They sent a written apology, and they posted it publicly on the community's online group where everyone could see it. They also offered to reimburse me for the cost of the certified county documents I had pulled, which was a small amount but I thought was a decent gesture. I accepted it. It has been a few months since that meeting. The new board has already made some changes, mostly around how the architectural committee operates and what due diligence is required before a notice goes out to any homeowner. I heard they also made some changes to how their attorney relationship works. I still see some of the neighbors regularly. Most of them are fine. A few who had been distant during the whole thing have gone back to being friendly, and I have no particular reason to hold on to it, so I do not. My shed is still standing, obviously. It looks great. The window box flowers came back this spring even fuller than last year. I finished restoring a Victorian-era writing desk in there last month, and it is one of the best pieces I have ever worked on. The committee chair no longer patrols the streets in her golf cart. I have not seen her do it once since the meeting. I am sure she still lives in the neighborhood, but she has become very quiet about it. I think about that framed city permit I hung on the wall inside the shed sometimes. When I first put it up, it was just my way of marking the effort that had gone into the project. Now it has a different weight to it. It is a reminder that doing things correctly, keeping your records, and knowing exactly what authority someone has over you matters more than most people think. Not just in theory. They came after me because they thought I was the kind of person who would get scared and comply. They had probably done it before to other people and it had worked. What they did not account for was that I do this kind of careful, meticulous document review every single day for a living. Finding the one line in a pile of paperwork that changes everything is basically my job description. They picked the wrong shed to call Unsafe. The next one is a malicious compliance story. A year ago, I got fired from a job as efficiency lead. It happened a week after I noted that I was going to become a father, but that's another aspect. The reason I was hired was to dig deeper into company issues, finding the root cause. My manager was thrilled to have an actual FBA on board. Cue her assistant manager. Since I needed to learn the ins and outs, she got me into spending 70% of my time into useless tracking that she needed for her glorious monthly pivot tables. The thing is that noting down of post-its, mails, and several other influx into a spreadsheet got me some very much needed insight. Either, for example, the printers were moved every month from one site to the other, or there was a huge flaw. Some, if those flaws would be considered huge flags for the equivalent of IRS. When I started tracking them, as my job was exactly that, the AM tried to block me from several internal data. Since the manager and her assistant were pretty close, I tried to get the actual department from said flaws in the loop. Less than a week later, the manager asked why I was snooping around other departments. Meanwhile, everyone I spoke to at other departments were more than helpful in gathering information, even speaking to counterparts at other sites. 2 days later, she notified me she asked IT for a full copy of my mailbox, against the law, and was not amused. Henceforth, I had to include her in every mail I send and had to write down by the minute on every case file I was working on. The last one was the easiest malicious compliance. When I got a call, I noted it. When I went to get a coffee, I noted internal movements, even someone sticking his head inside the door to say hi. She got an Excel sheet with about 600 lines a day, including a line after each entry for filling out the sheet. After 3 days, she was furious and wasn't taking things serious. Of course I wasn't, but she didn't have to know. I asked her to email me on the specifics she wanted me to write down and asked for a route path on every project. With a "you know what I want," she stormed off. I got an email from HR for a talk, told them everything, including my notes on every meeting. They asked me to just set up a spreadsheet with a total per day on every project and mailed it to the manager, including the note that I needed the information her assistant had blocked me from. The including in the email part was fairly simple. It was about 10% of my total conversations. When the manager went on vacation, she said she liked the new way of working and told me to push on 3 main issues I laid out. And of course, the assistant took her chance to get into the high chair. The mails were not adequate, so I had to send her a full report on any conversation. It started innocent, till I got to an old file with the signature of the assistant and several site managers. I started calling them and asked about the information listed. After about 5 phone calls and a small note mailed to the assistant, she stormed into the shared office calling me a no-good golden retriever trying to find truffles in muck water. She demanded a full report on any coming call. Cue malicious compliance number 2. I started using voice-to-text software to make full transcripts on any call. Even a question about something like, "How is the now cleaning lady doing?" was fully written down. Imagine receiving an average of 4 hours a day of transcription. Because of the flooding, she missed the pattern about the €1,000,000 issue I was gently going towards. When the manager came back, the assistant told her I was harassing her. Even without a chance to give a reply, I received an official letter at my house about an inquiry. The inquiry was the manager, someone from HR, and someone from the European chair. To top it all off, the assistant manager had given the manager a list of confidential documents that I have stolen from her private laptop, including that old file sitting somewhere on the server. When they asked why I needed that file, I started pointing out that the file was pointing to a huge flaw concerning legal documents and payments, the exact thing I was hired for. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that I was going out the door within a few days. So I started rattling up the cage. I read my initial job description and the internal guidelines to the role. The two guys I was working with went into a frenzy to find any consequence from that error. Site manager were alerted, accounting started making calculations. The last email that I received was probably sent too early. OP falsified several documents on the server to get manager and assistant manager into trouble. Any communication should be deleted by the end of the day. Needless to say, I had to pack my things. 3 months later, I met some guys from the company. Turned out, the damage was done, but the cover-up was even better. The avalanche of people involved that quit was undeniable. And some departments involved had over 50% of workforce sitting at home due to mental issues. The duo still works there, sitting on a lie that can still cost the firm millions a year since they still haven't solved the issue. The next one is an entitled people story. So my dad has been dating this woman for about a year now. I'll call her Anne. I really liked her. My dad has pretty bad taste in women, so I was pleasantly surprised. She and I hung out a lot, and she went out of her way for me, got me gifts, insisted we had girls' nights, just us two, bought us matching bracelets and pajama sets and all that. Now, I don't have a relationship with my mom. She was an abusive deadbeat, and Anne knew this, and I feel like she really tried to step into the mom role for me, even though I'm almost 30. And I'll admit, that broken little girl inside of me ate it up. 8 really thought she actually cared about me. Anyway, she and my dad broke up when we were at our family cabin celebrating my grandma in an explosive fight. Well, her blowing up at him. And she said some really nasty things about our entire family. I'm the only daughter, and she really targeted me for some reason. She said I was fat and superficial, and I took hours doing my hair and makeup because I was obsessed with male attention and that I use my body to make money. I'm a bartender, LOL. And that he raised a little slew, you get it. There was more, but that kinda what stuck out to me. She also called my gay brother homophobic slurs, implied he was gay, due to my dad failing to raise him, and said my other brothers are probably gay too, and said she'd have her sons kick their asses, and said my grandma is an old fat idiot. So nasty stuff. She didn't say it in front of us, but we could all hear her since they were outside on the deck. The reason she dumped him is unclear, but it seems like she was mad he bought a house close to my grandma and she wanted him to move closer to her family. They don't live together, but I do think when he told her he was buying a house, she thought it involved her. Anyway, that was around a month ago, and my dad has said she reached out to talk and wants to work things out. My dad's considering it because he's a moron who lets crazy women treat him and our family like garbage. He said she's sorry and she didn't mean it and she loves me and she has some issues because her ex cheated on her, and I'm like, so she can manipulate me and lie to my face while she secretly thinks awful things about me, just using me to get closer to my dad and to look like a good person because she was cheated on? Okay. Now here's why she's entitled. My brothers, aunt and uncle and I booked a family cruise for our dad's birthday. So it'll be my brothers and cousins and our partners, grandma and my uncle and aunt and their partners. And of course dad, and at the time her as well. We paid for it all, and again I'm not rolling in cash myself, but we thought it would be a nice gift because my dad loves cruises and grandma is fading away and she also has never left the country before and my dad adores her. We paid for the cabin Ann and my dad would stay in and both of their plane tickets. And Miss Ann thinks she's still coming, lol. She was shocked to hear that her plane ticket was canceled. My dad wants us to reconsider, and we have told him that if he thinks she's coming, then we will give away his cabin, and he can either stay home or book another cruise, because this one's sold out already, I'm pretty sure, at least the room's in his price range. So Anne never apologized to us, said nasty things about us, and thinks she's coming on a free cruise that we paid for. And she's so upset because she already bought a bunch of swimsuits and whatever. Sorry, Anne, I didn't want to subject you to my fat body in a bikini while I'm on the beach. Better if you stay home. The next one is an entitled parent story. Yesterday after work, I took my 5-year-old to our local playground because he'd been bouncing off the walls all day. It was pretty busy, lots of parents sitting on benches, kids running around, the usual. My son was on the climbing thing and I was standing nearby because he's still in that phase where he thinks he's invincible. A woman I'd never seen before was watching him way too hard, like following him with her eyes. I didn't think much of it until my kid slid down and ran over to me for water, and she marched up with her arms crossed and goes, "Is that your child?" I said yes, obviously, and she immediately hits me with, "Well, he keeps cutting in front of my daughter. You need to control him." I told her I'd talk to him, and I did. I said, "Hey buddy, wait your turn." He nodded and ran back. Thought that was it. Nope. 10 minutes later, she's back, this time louder, saying my son pushed her kid. My son is tiny and her daughter was older and bigger, but sure. I asked my son what happened. He said the girl wouldn't let him climb and he went around her and maybe he bumped her by accident. I apologized anyway because whatever. Playground stuff happens. Entitled mom then says, "I don't think he's even yours. I haven't seen you here before." I literally laughed because what? She tells me I need to show proof he's my kid or she's calling someone because people kidnap kids from parks all the time. At this point, other parents are looking over and my son is staring at me like he did something horrible. I said, "Lady, I'm not showing you anything. Back off." She tries to grab my son's wrist when he walks over, like to keep him there, and I snapped and pulled him behind me. I told her if she touches him again, I'm calling the police, and she instantly flips to the victim act, saying I'm aggressive and suspicious and that a real parent would understand her concern. One dad nearby finally speaks up and goes, "He's been here the whole time, calm down." She got mad at him too, saying he's enabling. She ended up leaving in a huff with her daughter, yelling that this park is unsafe. My kid asked me in the car if that lady thought I stole him, and I felt so gross about the whole thing. Anyway, thank you for watching.